And good morning. Peter Rose, Longwood Currency Trading. It is early in February 2021 and it just started snowing. We're supposed to get 6 to 12 inches between today and tomorrow afternoon or evening. And then you skip a day and then we're going to start again for another potential 6 to 12. So it could be a mess. Maybe on one of the videos I'll take you up with me and we'll be roof raking the snow. But for now, I wanted to chat about the importance of the win-to-loss ratio in Forex trading. Now, it's pretty common that the two basic trading metrics that are discussed and that traders use and banter about and all that stuff are reward to risk and win to loss. And I'm not a real fan of the risk to reward ratio because it really doesn't have anything to do with trading. Win to loss, however, is all about trading performance because it relies on the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers simply says that the more data points that you have, then the more accurate you can be in whatever assumptions that you're trying to make. By the way, this isn't going to be a complete video by any stretch. I've done a lot of slides that I'll be presenting, but you'll get probably a better view of those slides. You'll be able to look at them a little bit more closely and get a little bit more of the concepts that I'm trying to convey visually here in the video in a blog post that I wrote of the same title on my longwoodcurrencytrading.com website. It's about 3,000 words that I wrote. So I've done a lot of work in preparing this video, and so I'll be referring to my notes as I chat with you, and they go along pretty much with the flow from the blog post. It's just a blog post with 3,000 words obviously has a little bit more to say than I'm going to be talking about here. Well, yeah, the importance of more data points is that you can get a more accurate representation of what will happen in what they call the long run. For example, let me give you an idea of this out of the financial industry itself. And because it talks specifically to the more data points that you have, the more sure that you can do something. In financial marketing and sales, there's a methodology that they get their marketers and their salespeople to adopt in order to present their products or services to as many people as possible, because if you do that, then ultimately somebody's going to buy something, right? And so the process is it's called a 40-25-1 rule. You make 40 calls, you make 40 dials on the phone, you'll get 20 responses. In other words, 20 people will pick up the phone or whatever. Out of those, 25 of them are going to make appointments to talk with you, or they'll listen to you in depth, and out of that you'll get one sale. So over the long run, historically, over all a company's experiences in these product sales, you make 40 dials, you get 20 connects, you make 5 appointments, you make 1 sale. That's just the way the law of large numbers works for that, and they kind of humorously refer to that as dialing for dollars. And I've done that before in a past life in selling financial products, and it works, and you don't even have to really be very good at it. In fact, I had another experience where I was selling, I actually wasn't selling, but I watched a friend of mine who was selling home improvements, and had this canned speech that they went through. You could hardly understand him when he went and talked, but he'd knock on enough doors, and he knew. Look, he was making I don't know, a couple $100,000 a year. This is back in the early 80s. By this simple spiel and knocking on enough doors, he'd work 2 days a week, and for about 6 hours or 8 hours a week, and he'd end up making a lot of money on a yearly basis, just using the law of large numbers in what he was doing. So the point of me going into this is directly applicable to this win-to-loss ratio that we talk about over how many trades, the number of trades that you do. You gain more data points so that you can do some analysis, and you come up with this win-to-loss ratio. And that's the simple view of what goes on. And so somebody can say, well, I've got a 60% win-to-loss, or I've got a 90% win-to-loss, or whatever it is that they're able to achieve, and they just let it go at that, and so everybody just lets it go. Well, that's a win-to-loss ratio. That's all I need to know. No, that's not the whole utility of it. An example of how you would more productively use the win-to-loss ratio would be what win-to-loss ratio would you need to have in order to average out over all of the trades that you make just 5 pips per trade, so that at the end of a given number of trades, say 10 trades, you'd make 50 pips. Now, what is going to give you the answer to that question of anything else that's out there? And did you even know that that was a question that should be asked, and that there is a solution to that? And that's what I'm going to be talking about here. I'm not talking about the stupid-ass way that win-to-loss is discussed by everybody else. I'm going to talk to it with my physics and mathematics background, my experience in business other than trading, and how this all goes together. Calculating something like that using the win-to-loss ratio is the same thing as using a dialing for dollars. You know, if you make 40 calls, 20 connects, 5 appointments, you make 1 sale. Well, what's that 1 sale worth to you? Let's say that sale's worth $200. So the question is then, if that works, how many calls do you have to make in order to make $1,000 a week? Well, if it takes 40 calls to make 1 sale, then you got to make 200 calls to make 5 sales. So you got to make 200 calls a week in order to make $1,000. So you see the power of that law of large numbers. Now, and I discovered this for myself, basically because we were making well over 200 calls a week. But that was the target. The fact that you made 200 calls doesn't mean that you'll make 1 sale or 5 sales. The fact that you make 40 calls doesn't guarantee that you're going to make 1 sale. If you made 4,000 calls, you could pretty well figure that the number of sales that you make would equate to 1 in 40. But just to say, pick an arbitrary 40 calls and say I'm going to get a sale out of that is not right. You might have to make 200 calls to make 5 sales, but you couldn't guarantee that you could make 40 calls and make 1 sale. It's just a law of large numbers. You know that. Well, I do. But there's a correlation there between your persistence in gathering data points to find out what your win-to-loss ratio is, so that you have confidence in the system that you're trading, that it works over the long run. Today it may not be working. Tomorrow it may not be working. The next day it may not work. You may be cold for a freaking month. But if you have confidence in your system, yeah, maybe you lose 10 or 15% for that month. But you got to stay with that system, because over the long run in the past, you've identified that that system works. You can't guarantee yourself that if you flip a penny, that it's going to come up heads half the time, because it could come up heads 11 times in a row. I mean, my wife and I play backgammon all the time, and now that's a very probabilistic-oriented game. And man, oh, Jesus, we played last week. I'm 30 points down. I mean, but you look at the scores from a week-to-week basis, and sometimes my wife will be up, and sometimes I'll be up. And so you got to look over the whole run of a year and say, well, in the long run, one of us is going to be ahead, and of course that's going to be me, right? All right, but what's really happening here when we take this large data sample size and we get to this result? We know what that result's going to be. In other words, if I have a system that I feel is going to make an average of 5 pips per trade over a 10 trade basis, sometimes I'm going to make 50 pips, sometimes I'm going to lose 50 pips, but in the end, I want to make that 50. I want to make that 50. Let's say I trade 10 times a week. I want to make those 50 pips a week. How certain am I that that's going to happen, and how do I back through the data to say the probability that I will be able to achieve that goal of 5 average pips per trade day or per trade is valid? Well, we start at that thing, that value, that 50 value, and we work our way backwards because we don't know how we're going to get there. We don't know how we're going to go from here to the 50. But we know that 50 is our goal, just like we know that $1,000 a week is our goal. What do we have to do to make $1,000 a week when our profit per sale is $200? You have to work your way backwards, and that working the way backwards comes to the 40-25-1 rule. And so in order to do this in trading, you have to do a similar thing, because when you start out, you can't trade 10 times and say, oh, my win to loss is 80%, because the next 10 times you could be a negative 80%, right? So you have to do what those of us that have taken chemistry in school have a similar process of starting at the end and working backwards. It's called dry labbing. We dry lab the results. We know that the lab task is to precipitate out such and such a compound. So, okay, this is what I'm supposed to end up with. How do I start? I don't know how to start. So you work your way backwards. This compound is composed of what compounds? You figure that out. Okay, I've got these compounds. How do I make a test, or what can I start with that has all that stuff that will precipitate out through a series of chemical processes? So you gradually work your way back to the beginning. So, well, I got to start with all of this stuff in order to have these 5 things come out of it at the end to form this particular compound that I'm looking for. I dry lab the thing. So let's see how this is applicable to our trading win-to-loss ratio. I'm going to put up a slide here, slide number 1. And this is the basic win-to-loss formula. It's the number of pips won times the amount won divided by the number of pips lost times the amount lost, and that should equal 1. And the reason that equals 1 is slide 2 that I'm now going to put up, which is the real formula that you would agree with, is that the number of wins minus the number of losses has to equal 0. That's how that equation comes up. So, and that makes sense. If I win 5 times and I lose 5 times, I make nothing, right? So that just makes sense. But what we want instead of 0 at the end of that equation is that after I'm done winning and I'm done losing, let's take a look at let's take a look at this at the next part of that, where I say that equation is equal to 50. That's what we really wanted that to come out to be. In other words, the total number of pips won times the amount won minus the pips lost times the amount lost should come out to be equal to 50. And that 50 would be 10 trades. I could say 500 for 100 trades, or whatever you want to make it. But I'm trying to keep the percentages easy and simple, to deal with as we go through with this stuff. So that's what we're trying to do. So if we go to the next step of looking at that equation, wins minus losses equals 50. Let's simplify it and say that we're going to trade with a $1,000 bank, so that each time we win something, we win $1, because 1 pip on a mini is $1 a pip, right? And so really what we're talking about here is winning 50 pips for the course of the year. So really what we can do is we can take a look at eliminating the amount won and the amount lost values as both equal to 1, because when we win, we're going to win 1, and when we lose, we're going to lose 1. So it's the number of pips times the amount lost. So it's, if I lose 10 pips, I lose $10. So I don't have to replicate the amount won and lost. So we can eliminate those. Now let's go and take a look at slide 3. So we're going to fill in this equation and work our way through it. We're going to make our life easy and always use a hard 8 pip stop loss. Now in my other videos and stuff, because I'm a day trader and I've got a 5 pip ATR, my 8 pip stop is reasonable. It's 1.5 times the ATR, which is valid. I'm looking for a 25 pip profit target, which is 3 times that 8 pip loss. So I'm well within those boundaries. That's not why I use them to be within any boundaries. It's because I want to get out of that position very quickly if I'm wrong. So I always set the 8 pip stop when I've got the other characteristics. So in that first part of the equation there, you see that I've transformed the percentage of times that I win times the number of pips that I win minus the percentage of times that I lose times 8 pips, and that's going to equal 50. So out of the remaining percent won and number of pips won and percent lost, what are we really looking for? Well, we're looking for the number of pips won. And so if you do a little magic algebra, you come up with the actual formula that we're going to work with, is that the number of pips that I win when I win is going to be equal to the 50 pips I want to end up with plus the percentage of times that I lose times 8 divided by the percentage of times that I win. So for example, the last equation there, for a 60-40 win to loss trader, this equates to the number of pips won, 50 plus 4 times 8 divided by 6 equals 13.67 pips. And what that means is if you're a 60-40 trader and you're looking to make 5 pips on average per trade, you have to win 13.67 pips each time you win in order to cancel out the 40% of the time that you lose 8 pips. So let's come out of that slide here and chat with you a little bit. So there's a lot of ways that win to loss ratio can be stated. We stated a 60-40 loss, which is really 6 wins out of 10 trades or 4 losses out of 10 trades. So the 6 and the 4 go together. You can't have 6 wins and 6 losses because that doesn't add up to 100%. 60 and 60 don't add up to 100%. So the 60 and the 40 are related to each other. Whatever the percentage win that you choose has a corresponding equal amount that you must lose in order to end up with 100% on the sample size, okay? This is where it gets neat, because I'm going to show you a graph or an image of the first 10% increment thing that I have. So if you look at that, you can see, and there'll be more detailed charts on the blog post. But what this represents for you is, I'm going to start out with a certain win rate of 10%, and I'm going to work my way down to where I have a 100% win rate, or 90% win rate, whatever it is. So you can see that if I have a 10% win rate, I'm going to have a 90% loss rate. If I have a 20% win rate, I've got an 80% loss rate. So those two numbers are inexorably defined. And so in my equation that we showed before, where the number of pips won, on the other side of that equation, you had the percent loss and the percent won. You're dividing the percent won into the percent losses. And so if I create a spreadsheet that says I need to see what a 60% win rate is, the spreadsheet will automatically calculate that, well, I need, if I'm using a 60% win rate, I got to have a 40% loss rate. And it will then give you that 13.67 pips. So that's what that graph that's in front of you shows. It shows those win rates. Those are the win rates that I change, and each time I change that, it automatically changes to the appropriate loss rate, and it gives you the number of pips that you're going to have to win. Okay, so you look at that. And then you look at the other side of that. There's a graph there that shows you the number of pips that you need to win as a function of that win to loss ratio. And you'll see that graph where the win to loss ratio crosses, so that you're winning more than you're losing. That's the point that you want to look at and focus on, because what does the graph look like as you increment forward further in your x axis? In other words, you're going to drop from needing 13.67 pips per trade down to, 12 or 15. And then as you go further, winning percentages more in 10% increments, how does that reduce the number of pips that you won until you get all the way down on the tail of that number of pips won graph, and you're down to like 7 pips or 6 pips that you need to win per trade, because you're winning so many times. That's why it's important to understand what your win to loss ratio is, and the fact that your system is a reflection, your trading system and your trading psychology are reflections of that win to loss ratio, right? Because the better your win to loss ratio, it means that your system of trading is better. So you tweak that system over a long period of time until you can see that you need less and less pips to win per trade, and then that's the win to loss ratio that you need to have. So if I'm having a hard time getting 13 pips win average per trade, then I need to increase my winning rate so that I only have to win 7 or 8 pips. Cut that needed thing in half. So you have to judge your ability. This is where you're dry labbing. You're looking at the amount of trades that you have, and what's the maximum number of pips that you gain when you win? What's the minimum number of pips that you gain when you win? What's the median of that value? What's your highest expectation? And you look at that and you say, well, gee, I'm working off the daily charts, and so my winning expectation is, averages about 40 pips. And so now you go back into that win-to-loss equation, and you pick 400 as the number of times that you want to win. You plug your stop loss into that, and then you find the percentage gain where it ends up, that number of pips that you're comfortable with. You say, well, that's the win-to-loss ratio I've got to have. So I've got to have a system that supports that. That's the importance of it. So I hope you found the correlation there between the data and the graph. Because on the blog post, and I may put it on here too, you can come away from that. Excuse me. Come away from that image. So the data and the graph that you just saw was based on I win one time out of 10, so I win 1 and I lose 9. I win 2 and I lose 8. I win 3, it goes down that way, 10, 20, 30. But I also have another graph. Well, what if I win 1 and then I win 1.5? What's the corresponding loss that I miss? And then I go to 2, and then I go to 2.5 and 3. So I'm going down in 50% increments of that whole amount, 5%. And then I have a third study that I do where I start with 1, and what would the loss be if I had 1.1 wins per loss? What would the difference between for example, 6.6, for example, a 60% win rate, which is 6 wins, as opposed to 6.1 wins in the 10 trade series. So it refines it. In other words, it would give you a smoother graph of data, so that when you went on to that and found the cross of the wins to losses, it wouldn't be such a rough thing. It wouldn't be 10% apart. You could say, well, my win-to-loss ratio crosses at let's just use my old things, a 13 pip per trade win. And then all I would have to do would be to go from 6.0 to 6.5 wins in order to bring that 13.67 value down to maybe 12 or 11 pips per trade. So that's how you use the refined graph. And if you go to my blog post, you can look at it over a long period of time than what I have here. So the importance that I guess I need to try to get across is the purpose of the win-to-loss ratio is not what it is, but how do you get to it, and what's the correlation between win-to-loss and the particular methodology that you're using in your trade analysis. That's the important thing. Peter Rose, Longwood Currency Trading. Have a great day. Have a great trading day.